My guest today is Richard Blake. He is a PhD in psychology and conducted the largest randomized controlled trial on conscious connected breathwork. So, we're going to talk all about that in the episode. He is a biohacker, crossfitter, and advocates for change and improvement in mental health services to focus on holistic approaches that include altered states of consciousness, exercise, nutrition, spirituality, and human connection. Obviously, you can see why I was very excited to have him on the show. And man, this is information packed. Like, I was so excited to speak with someone who is like actively in research for breathwork, which has become hands down one of my favorite healing modalities. I recommend it to my clients, to my friends, to my family, and it's been so powerful for me. So I learned a lot in this episode, and I hope you do too. So we'll go ahead and get into it. Here is Richard Blake. All right. So, Richard, I'm excited to dive into all sorts of things, psychology and healing and consciousness with you. I've been watching some of your content on social media. It's really great. We'll link that up, by the way. And let's start with breath work because that's obviously an area of expertise for you. And you've recently, right? It's not quite published yet, your study. You've recently done a study. Can you talk about that study and just a little more background about breath work and why it matters to you?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me, firstly. And my study is currently under peer review at Nature Scientific Reports, and it's on Research Square. So if people want to
Wow.
read it and see the mounting criticisms it's already received, it's just the first draft. It's normal. You get other PhDs to review it. They get paid in Research Square's coin, so a type of crypto to encourage academics to do sort of
Oh,
early stage open access stuff. But yeah, some really sort of a couple of my friends reviewed it and been like, the needs areas of improvement. But then there's some guys like a professor at this Danish university. He's like, this looks more like a hobby project, just like tearing it apart.
oh
And I have to
man.
respond like, yeah, I have done all this stuff. It's just not in this first draft. So yeah, big lesson for me there. But academia is brutal. That's one big lesson. But the study itself. So yeah, conscious connected breathwork is what I did my study on. So there's lots of different types of breathwork, of course. I'm sure a lot of people know conscious connected breathwork, but that's the one that's like a
No.
psychedelic.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Fully dive in just in case. We've had some
Yeah.
episodes, but this might be somebody's first.
Yeah. So there's lots of different types of breath work. Pranayama, maybe people think breath work is what they do in yoga. That is a type of breath work. There's Wim Hof. Wim Hof is obviously, or not obviously, but probably the most famous breath worker, and that's probably the most famous technique right now. It's great. I teach a style of that called Soma as well. Then there's functional breathing, so that's like Patrick McEwen, Oxygen Advantage, Buteyko. So that's more about like optimizing your breath for endurance or for CrossFit or for whatever, for sleep, for anxiety. And then there's Buteyko, which is more like healing asthma. Conscious connected breathwork, I think, is the most potent, most powerful. The one that I think deserves the most amount of research. It puts people into non-ordinary states of consciousness, akin to moderate doses of psychedelics, and it's some people call it therapeutic breathwork because Wim
Mhm.
Hof is more like kind of getting high on your own supply. It's amazing for changing your state, but it's maybe not going to heal people's PTSD or anxiety by going to the root. So conscious connected breath work, it's not something you can like just tell people to do. They need facilitators really because it is so potent. Things can happen like tetany, which is like cramping, where you get these kind of lobster hands. People can get emotional flooding because of you have changes in the brain chemistry, changes in blood chemistry, where emotions that have previously been suppressed come up, and people aren't often expecting that. So it has a lot of guardrails, and there's quite a few contraindications, and there are also a lot of cowboys out there in the breathwork world teaching it unregulated. So you've got to be careful of who your breathwork facilitator is. So my study, well, maybe I'll say how I started the study or
Yeah.
why I decided to do it. So I had my struggles with mental illness as a younger man, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, binge eating disorder, body dysmorphia, loads of stuff. Did therapy for a few years. It kind of helped stabilize me, but I still had a lot of those core issues. And I enrolled in a psychotherapy master's program in the UK, did 2 years of it, and during that time discovered conscious connected breath work, and
Mm.
that was what really sort of moved the needle. I was no longer binging, no longer anxious, no longer depressed, no longer having suicidal ideation, and it just was completely, yeah, it's just so powerful for me, so potent for me. And as I was studying psychotherapy, I realized there was no talk of breath in psychotherapy training, and there was, despite something like 80% of people who having anxiety have dysfunctional breathing, not a single mention of that in 2 years of psychotherapy training. And I'm sure I had one more year to do. There wouldn't have been any mention of breath in anxiety there. And also then, whilst I was writing these papers, I would see meta-analyses and things of like from the likes of Pim Kuipers, who's like, yeah, therapy probably works for about 48% of people. And then there's another meta-analysis being like, oh, 48% of those people relapse after 8 weeks. So maybe for anxiety, therapy works for about 25% of people. Then I dug a little bit deeper and it's like, well, there's actually, for men at least, a 46% dropout rate from therapy. So in a study, the people who are dropping out is just called attrition. They're just not included. So it's not, they're not saying, oh, it didn't work for them. They're not even being counted, even though it's obvious that they
Wow.
didn't work for them.
Mm.
So I kind of concluded that it works for about 13% of people, which suggests to me it's not as effective as we've been led to believe. And a lot of people, especially men, it seems like, get pushed towards therapy, it doesn't work for them, and then they get blamed. They'll be like, well, you're not engaging with the process, you just don't want to heal. It's, oh, I've had so many like girlfriends saying to me like, I told my boyfriend to go to therapy, it really helped me, and he won't go, he clearly doesn't love me. And I'm like, that's not the
Right.
conclusion we should be
Right.
taking here. It's
Totally.
therapy is not right for everyone, and so it may be not even right for most people. I also, was looking into a lot of addiction stuff back then, and found papers that showed that talk therapy only worked for about 8% of addicts or people struggling with addiction. So I was just like really disheartened by this. I was like, am I going to do another 2 years, including a year-long internship where I have to work probably like in a clinic, a mental hospital, or a prison with really struggling people for free? And I'm not even convinced this thing actually works.
Mm.
At the same time, I was volunteering for a charity called Duty to Care in the UK, and this was set up during the pandemic to help the National Health Service workers. So the people who are, on the front lines of the pandemic, the nurses, the doctors, the nutritionists, all in the National Health Service, and I was giving them free breath work. And I would get calls up from these doctors and nurses, and they'd be like, "Hey, I've heard about this breath work thing. What's the evidence behind it?" And I was like, "Isn't really much, but it is free. Would you like an appointment?" And they were just like, "Nah." So I got sick of not being able to give people answers, despite what I felt was the most potent thing for mental health, and in my anecdotal experiences of my clients being like, this is like turbo psychotherapy, this is like 10 years of therapy, this is so effective for me. I just then, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to waste any more time on psychotherapy. So I switched to doing a research-based degree here in San Francisco in transpersonal psychology, where I conducted a randomized control trial on conscious connected breath work, and we had an N of 108. It was a crossover study, so we had 108 data points, and we had a control group who just did treatment as usual. We measured both groups' anxiety before and after either being in this wait list or doing 6 weeks of 90-minute conscious connected breathwork ceremonies with me in an online environment on Zoom, and we had phenomenal results. So we had statistical significance. We also had a large effect size. So this was another thing when you could look at specifically CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety. It shows a small effect size, and in some studies, no effect size at all. And then you also look at publication bias. So there's a thing in academia where journals want to make money. They want headlines. They want this thing works really well. They don't tend to publish studies saying we looked at cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety and we couldn't really tell if there was a result. There probably wasn't. That just doesn't get published. So only the positive ones get published. The rest of them just get thrown in the bin. So that suggested to me, also that CBT maybe doesn't even have a small effect size, whereas conscious connected breathwork, or CCB as I call it, has a large effect size on clinical levels of anxiety, like people with clinically high levels of anxiety. So yeah, it was really, really encouraging, because I really felt like I rolled the dice. I was just on another podcast speaking about the sort of the pressure. I felt like, oh, if I did this study and found it didn't work, I would be ending the careers of probably many breath workers. But yeah, it all worked out really well in the end.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. I'll just throw in, for those who haven't done this before, which is, I'm assuming you're talking about something very similar to Stan Grof's holotropic breath work. So some people may be familiar with that. But essentially, you're doing rhythmic breathing, and there's different styles. But rhythmic breathing, usually in and out of do you do in and out of your mouth, like the chest, belly, let it all out kind of thing? And yeah, you may, if you haven't done this before, you may be thinking, like, what, you do that for, you said 90 minutes? The first time I ever did it, I was like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to keep doing this for that long. Like, what? But you just do. You just do, and you have a guide, and for me, as someone who's done a lot of different plant medicine, psychedelics, and they've been profoundly healing for me. I, in some ways, prefer breath work for emotional healing, or like the therapeutic side of things. And I'll tell you why. Because the plant medicines, they they're amazing and they work in their own mysterious ways. But sometimes I get taken down these rabbit holes of like stuff that has nothing to do with my life when I'm in those. It's like consciousness exploration. But with breath work, it is almost always actually therapeutic things that I needed to, like, either somatically release. I bawl my eyes out. I laugh during every single one. So I have this huge somatic release, and it's like, hey, here's how you've been seeing things. Like, you're seeing it like this, but it's actually like this, and hey, you need to actually feel that for yourself. Well, yeah, feel sorry for yourself for a second. That was hard. Cry. It was hard, and it's like so healing. And I in terms of the usage for therapeutic benefit, like, I honestly have come to just prefer, you don't have to deal with all the legal issues, and does somebody have mental illness, or they don't know about it and they could go into some, psychosis, split, and all this risk factors. And it's like a little more targeted towards the actual therapeutic benefit. So I just wanted to give my, like, stamp of approval. It's something that I has been dramatically impacting on my life. I'm referring it constantly to friends, family, clients. I'm like, it is a little hard right now because it's like, hey, find somebody who does it. Okay, send me their website. Let me do a vibe check on them. Okay, shoot, I can't tell. Freak. Okay, just use your own gut check. You know? How trained are they? Okay, that's a little bit of a limitation, but it's not as bad as, like, hey, go find a shaman who can take you through a freaking plant medicine ceremony, or fly to Peru or Costa Rica or something. So I love
Yeah.
that you did the work to make this more validated. Because, like, those of us who have experienced it, we don't really need that. Like, we freaking know it works.
Yeah.
But in order for it to be more accessible to more people, it needs to be validated. So,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot I want to add there.
mhm.
Yeah, I guess my experience of being online as well is like people are so skeptical. I can remember I did a breathwork session for like a YouTuber in the UK, and I filmed him on my iPhone just coming out of the session. I'd kind of left him. We'd done like 40 minutes, and I just sat back and left him, and then I kind of guided him out of the session whilst recording him. And he was just like, wow, like you could see he'd just like come back from another galaxy. Like he was just completely altered. And he was just like, this is amazing. I've just been to another galaxy. How long have we been here? I was like, 40 minutes. He was like, I felt like I've been there for like 5 minutes and my entire lifetime. And the people in the comments were like, this is clearly staged. That's a professional camera. Like, I was like, no, this is my iPhone. It's just it was like the new iPhone. It had just come out at the time and they'd upgraded it. And people are just so desperate online to be like, that a fake, and all that stuff. So yeah, it is great to validate stuff with published research. And then yeah, just in the comparison to psychedelics, like I think psychedelics are incredible in terms of the research they've got. I'm
Mhm.
not suggesting that CCB is like as potent as that. I think for most people it will be. Psychedelics are sort of the top of the pole, but for other people who maybe, like you said, they don't want to break the law, they don't want to fly to Peru, they don't want to find a shaman who maybe they doesn't even speak Spanish, let alone English. They're Shipibo or something like that, and there's language barriers. There are a lot of benefits to doing CCB. My mentor Alan Dolan, the breath guru, or he's not the breath guru, his company's called Breath Guru because your breath is actually the guru, is what we say. Is like your breath will never give you more than you can handle, whereas ayahuasca can feel like it's you're drinking
Uh-huh.
from the fire hose.
Mhm.
Also within ayahuasca or mushrooms or things like that, you're on a roller coaster and there's no getting off. Whereas with conscious connected breath work, you've got an off switch and it's simply closing your mouth and going back to normal nasal breathing. And another thing that I wanted to do with my study was all the research that had been done up to that point on CCB had been done in person. But because of the pandemic, everyone had to go online to teach CCB. And this was the first study to show that CCB is just as effective online. When held in sort of like responsible ways. And yeah, for people who I can work with people all around the world now just through Zoom, and people get phenomenal results.
Amazing. Okay, so let's go a little bit more into like, you mentioned that you had a lot of suffering going on. All right. And I think, I mean, I can definitely resonate. Even when I did go to Costa Rica and to an ayahuasca place, and I'll just share, we had one night of this type of breath work the first night. Then we had ayahuasca 4 nights in a row. And then we had 2 more nights of breath work. And while I'm so grateful to the ayahuasca, she was very gentle with me. I was going through a very, very traumatic time in my life. And yeah, it was very gentle. I did not experience what a lot of people experience. She was very loving with me. But I also had had a lot of psychedelic experience before that. So maybe I had already worked through some of the, I don't know. But anyway, the breath work though, like when I look back at that experience in terms of shifts that happened inside of me in terms of like heart healing and like the way I was looking at things and just relate my all my relationships and all of that. Like when I look back at the actual like breakthrough moments, those for me were actually in breath work. And so, you've had your own experience with this and obviously you facilitate with it. You mentioned anxiety, but can you mention some more, experiences, benefits, like what happens during these sessions that's so beneficial for people?
Sure. Was it Rhythmia you went to?
Yeah.
Yeah, not a huge fan of the way they do breath work, but I like their general approach.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard many bad things about Rhythmia. I'm the type where it's like, just get me in a situation. I'll explore. I just, you know what I mean? I'm not super dependent on the outside sources. I had a really positive experience is all I'm going to say, but I generally tell people they should maybe check out the other one in
Yeah,
Costa Rica.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it just speaks to a sort of a problem in breath work is like overconfidence of breath workers think they can handle like a 1 to 50 ratio of
Right.
practitioners to clients, and most of the time that's fine. But there's when you hear people have had a bad experience, it's almost always because there's not enough facilitators. The facilitators are not breath workers. They're just like you know, just people they've found off the streets to come, and they have no idea how to handle someone in an altered state when they may be processing their trauma. So, yeah, there's a lot of growth to be done in this sort of, the
Field.
breathwork industry. This
Right.
field. So other use cases. So PTSD is another one. So there was one study by DeWitt and Morris Cruz in Brazilian firefighters. So it was just a clinical case study. So it's just it's not a randomized control trial, so it's not as good evidence, but they found that with 8 sessions of conscious connected breath work, someone with PTSD had complete remission of their PTSD in those 8 weeks, as well as they were
Wow.
measuring their HRV. Like this person had like a flatlined HRV and it went back up into sort of a healthy range. Alcohol dependence, there's a couple of studies on alcohol dependent people. There's a couple from Brewerton, and then there's another study from an Indian alcohol dependence center where obviously there's a lot of confounding variables because they're in an alcohol dependent center, so they're probably doing group therapy and other things, but they found that the people who did the conscious connected breath work, they recovered faster and more reliably with the conscious connected breath work versus the people who weren't doing it.
Mhm.
Um, what other things had they done? I mean, yeah, like satisfaction with life. Loads of studies have looked as people's life satisfaction and improved people's life satisfaction. And there was one study by Utaug who found that, yeah, I can't remember how many sessions it was, but some sessions of CCB improved life satisfaction to the same extent as 5-MeO DMT. So a comparison, not a direct comparison. Some academics will tell me off for doing a direct comparison because they didn't actually compare 5-MeO DMT, but the authors of that study did actually say life satisfaction improved to the same extent as with 5-MeO DMT. Um, just general like mental health. So there's a really cool study with this lady called Martha Havaneth who I've been messaging, and she has done a study with Robin Carhart Harris, who's done a lot of the research at Imperial. He's been in loads of like
Mhm.
psychedelic
Mhm.
documentaries, and he was an author on this study. So they this is I think it's my favorite study so far. I'm that much of a nerd. I have favorite studies. um, but she found that they measured people's depth of altered states by checking in every 15 minutes with people with hand signals. So people were doing conscious connected breath work, and they also had a placebo group of people just doing slower than normal breathing. And they would go up and be like, "How altered are you? Give me a hand signal, one to five, five being really high, and not being able to respond is obviously like I'm off in
Right.
another universe. I can't even speak." Um,
Thanks for interrupting.
yeah, maybe. Um, they found that there was a direct correlation between how altered people went and their improvements in mental health outcomes. So they did a before and
Wow.
after survey of like how satisfied are you with your life? I think it was like the 11 points of consciousness questionnaire and then another sort of like general mental health questionnaire.
Mhm.
And yeah, they found the more altered people were, the greater the improvement in people's mental health. Another really interesting thing from that is they also found in the placebo group, they also had statistically significant altered states of consciousness, even though they were just breathing normally or just slightly lower than normal. But they were saying like there must be some kind of contagion effect, like being around people who are in altered states alters the states of other people. Mind
Yeah,
blowing to me.
I've experienced it, so I'm like, yeah, yeah. Wow. Okay. What do you know about thank you so much for all that. And then what do you know about like, you know, um there's DMT released, right? When you get into these, but is there not? Like what happened? What do you know about what is happening in the physiology that's
Yeah.
resulting in these things happening? There's not
S-
DMT released?
No, I don't think
No
so. I would
way.
say that's quite a low. I don't want to sound like you know, too critical, but I say that's quite like a low resolution take. W-
Wow. That's what
as
I've just always heard. I haven't done a research study on it, so
Yeah. Um, it's kind of bro science, I would say. It's possible that
Wow.
DMT is released because people have sort of like done 2 + 2 = 10. Like we have DMT at certain points of our lungs. Maybe we have DMT in our lungs. Sorry, in our we release DMT at certain points of our life. Maybe there's evidence there's DMT in our lungs, and because it seems like we're getting psychedelic effects, let's
Yeah.
say it's like an ayahuasca ceremony, it must be DMT. It's probably not DMT. It's probably more a prediction error in the brain. So a prediction error is like, when you're walking down the stairs and you think there's one more step and you step and it's
Mhm.
not. That's a prediction error. And your brain's like, whoa, 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 what happened? I thought there was a step there. Like I thought
Mhm.
there would be something there. But because you're doing this voluntary over breathing and you're continuing it for 10, 20 minutes, an hour, something happens in the brain where it just can't really compute what's going on. So things go haywire. That's one mechanism.
Mm.
Another mechanism suggested is pivotal mental states. So, pivotal mental states is another theory that explains or hypothesizes to explain psilocybin. Is basically psilocybin acts on the serotonin 5-HT2A receptors, and probably this breathwork also enacts on those same receptors. This creates a really plastic state in the brain, and this is an evolutionary response. So when something like shocking happens in a person's life, let's say you lose your father in an accident, a saber-toothed tiger eats your father, it just turns your whole world upside down. Let's say your father was, the primary defender of the tribe. You need to go change things radically, really quickly to find like a new defender. If you're that person, maybe you step up to be the defender, or you move where you're living because you can't defend this without your father. You need to make really rapid changes in your life to survive. And you can basically do that with breathwork. You can create this plastic state where, oh my God, I need to quit my job. Why have I not realized this before? Like I've been talking about this for therapy for years, but I've never really realized it at this deeper level. Or it's like, smoking is often given as an example. People can talk about wanting to quit smoking for years and years and years, but they never do it. Then they do CCB or psilocybin, and they're like, of course I need to stop smoking. Why have I never done this? And then they stop smoking. It's because of this plastic state in the brain. Then we also have a couple of studies on what's actually happening in the brain. So, an EEG study, and then also a study on cerebral hemodynamics. So, these are not like randomized control trials. They're not published. They're papers in that were presented at academic conferences. So, again, not the highest level of evidence, but really interesting. So, what they found in the brain waves is gamma goes up, gamma brain waves go up, alpha brain waves go up, beta goes down. Gamma is the kind of like the dream one. That is what is associated with like mystical experiences and death as well. Like when we die, we go up into gamma. There's new studies showing there's a wave of gamma synchrony that comes as we die, and supposedly that could be evidence of
Mm.
the soul. Also, changes in cerebral hemodynamics. So that just means how the blood flow in the brain changes. And this study also suggests that the changes in people's brain blood flow are basically the same as what's happening in psilocybin. So those are a couple of things that I think are much better explanations than maybe there's
Mm.
DMT.
So maybe what people are attributing to what they've been told it's DMT, right? Like with ayahuasca and this, and it's like, okay, so that's what DMT feels like, but maybe what they're noticing is what being in a gamma brainwave state feels like,
Right.
mixed in with some other things.
It
Yeah,
could also be DMT. I just think it's probably unlikely.
really. Why do you think it's unlikely?
There's no evidence for it. We've got all these other mechanisms that are more plausible, and
Okay.
yeah, I think it's just there's no evidence for it. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, but I think these other explanations are yeah, higher resolution.
So the whole DMT thing was just somebody guessing. So they're
Yeah,
like, yeah, they're just like just shooting off their hip. Yeah, it's
yeah,
DMT.
yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Now I won't look stupid in the future, so I appreciate that. Um, all right. I want to dive a little bit. So conscious connected breath work, right? So you're talking about these gamma brainwave states, like you're calling it that for a reason. Like, how do you see? I mean, I know you're publishing this stuff, like very scientific, very validated, whatever. And also as a human, on a human level, how do you describe what you experience in these like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, what is your
Yeah,
experience of it?
yeah. So many people have different experiences every single time. Sometimes people will come in and say, I've never had the same experience twice. You know, I came in here being prepared to go be blissed out like I was in the first time, but I was dealing with this breakup I had, and I had all these tears and this grief, and I felt it in my body. And then the next time they come in, and their body's just like releasing tension from the nervous system. They're like twitching all over their body, and you know, they're yawning, like excessive yawning, which probably is you know, tension being released from the parasympathetic activation of the nervous system. So yeah, always say like we never know what's going to happen. We're prepared for anything. I've seen all sorts of things. You know, I've seen people obviously crying, laughing, getting really angry, burping, vomiting, farting, diarrhea. Like all this stuff can
Wow.
happen. Yeah, people having like twitches all over their body and yeah, those types of things. So it's pretty diverse what can happen. Um, but it seems to be pretty healing. You know, I haven't had anyone ever say like that was terrible. I wish I never done that. I tend to do one-to-ones. I have heard people say that was terrible. I've never done that, and it was because they were in a group and they were unsupported. So yeah, I would
Mhm.
say that's the key. Is like make sure you're going for like a reasonable facilitator to client ratio. The Global
Mhm.
Breathwork Practitioner Alliance says like 1 to 7. So yeah, just make sure you're being well supported when you go into it.
Mm. Okay, you hit on, thank you for that. And you hit on the like the parasympathetic nervous system activation. And this is like definitely something I've noticed from it. And you know, a reason that I recommend it, there seems to be a somatic release that just tends to happen. Are you saying, you know, what is your explanation for that? Like it feels like it's just shifts it out of your body, you know?
Yeah.
Like I don't have an explanation for it. I'm curious what you got.
Yeah, I got loads.
Yay.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot happening with the nervous system. So a lot of studies have been done on CCB and HRV, and sort of the main theme is like it is initially stressful. You do activate the sympathetic portion of the nervous system because you're breathing in and out through your mouth, which activates the sympathetic. You're also breathing faster than normal, which activates the sympathetic. You're also your inhales longer than your exhale, another thing that's activating the sympathetic portion of the autonomic nervous system. So you initially get like a suppression in the HRV. So actually, it is like a hormetic stressor to start with. But then towards the end of the session, you see a rebound in HRV. It goes back up. People go into parasympathetic. And then after the session as well, people's baselines have increased. So it is increasing people's resilience from a sort of a nervous system perspective. Um, Stan Groff, oh no, sorry, Ryan Wine and Williams said like CCB is activating a cognitive somatic cycle. So this is like the brain and the body are going through some kind of cycle. They're linking up. Things in the body are being released. Things in the brain are being released. And yeah, you're getting a kind of resolution of things, both from that physiological thing of yeah, let's just call it release, and you're getting these like deep realizations, and you're also getting these emotional releases. And I think the emotional releases are related to this concept of transient hypofrontality that Ryan Wine and Williams came up with. So that is the same thing as like runner's high. So when we do things like, you know, long distance running or conscious connected breath work, you are over breathing. You're blowing off your carbon dioxide. And because of this thing called the Bohr effect, when you don't have carbon dioxide, your hemoglobin doesn't release the oxygen to the cells. So it gets stuck in the blood. So the brain is getting less oxygen. And during that time, it basically prioritizes survival parts of the brain. So emit the amygdala and the hippocampus and those kinds of areas get more blood flow, and the prefrontal cortex gets less. The prefrontal cortex is sort of our higher order thinking, is supposedly the last part of the brain to have come in when we've evolved. One of its jobs is to protect us from pain, and that includes emotional pain. And this is why I think going back to psychotherapy, some people don't benefit from psychotherapy is because they can talk about their problems, they can give you a dissertation in their attachment disorders, but the problems don't change because they're not really accessing the emotions because the prefrontal cortex is blocking it. When the prefrontal cortex gets down regulated with this transient hypofrontality, you get these spontaneous releases of emotions. You get access to those thoughts. And like you said at the start, like sometimes you do need to go and feel your pain. Sometimes you do need to feel like a victim to heal. You need to go back into that space, feel the pain, feel the sadness, feel the injustice, feel the grief, process it,
Mhm.
and then move on. The viral post that I mentioned earlier was kind of criticizing people for just endlessly talking about the pain, getting stuck in that victim mode and never moving forward. Whereas I think we need a bit of both. We need time to heal, time to feel the bad things that happened to us, time to feel the bad things we did to other people, but then move forward once we're done.
Mm, thank you for that. Okay, now it all makes sense. Possibly a little bit of serotonin. It basically it's like your prefrontal cortex is like your ego, almost part of your brain. It's like, here, protect you. Don't feel those things, in a way. Yeah, and just like put some like real life context to this for people. Like I have a someone close to me who has been through a lot of trauma lately, had a lot of childhood trauma, a big divorce, personality disorders, and she's just like can't even see straight right now, right? And it's been a year or so, and I was like, "You should maybe go do some breath work." So she went and did it, and she said everything turned red, and she just felt the most intense anger she has ever felt. And I was like, yep." And she said she thought to herself, "Who is so angry?" And she heard, "You are." And she just like stayed in that for a while to just kind of give some context for the things, but it was so releasing for her. Then all these things, these little intuitive, and when I hear conscious connected breath work, that's how it is for me. It's like it feels like if you're looking for a breakthrough and I think that's the point of why people go to therapy or do any of these things is like I'm trying to have an epiphany. Well, I have never done a breath work session like this in which I didn't have a breakthrough or epiphany. And they're much, much, much deeper than you just trying to I have aha moments. I have a therapist right now. I'm doing the traditional therapy model. It's been really cool. He's amazing, like 25-year veteran, super educated. He's very behavioral. Love him. Great. It's like I'm dabbling in that. I'm having aha moments, but in breath work, I'm just saying I have like completely like life altering, like I'm just in a different, I see everything different now kind of epiphanies from one session. It doesn't mean I don't have to integrate sometimes, like, but definitely feels a lot easier. So just giving some, anecdotal support and like what
Yeah.
this is actually like for people. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have a lot of people who just, yeah, they get to know themselves. They're just so
Yeah.
disconnected because they had to disconnect to survive the environment of their childhood, and then they'd never had the chance to go that layer deeper, and breathwork can do that. And one of the ways it does that with those epiphanies is it increases BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. So it's increasing your brain power to figure out what's going on for you. So yeah, that's another thing. And I would also say, like, certainly on Instagram, it seems like the only way you can heal from a mental health issue is by, like, having spasms and having like a breath worker like take your possessions out of you, take entities out of you, all this like trauma porn and floods of tears and punching pillows. But that's a part of healing. But I think also there's so much to say for just the little stuff, the stuff you do every day, how you speak to yourself, how you self-soothe. And, that can be like a million interactions over the course of a year that you have to just change slowly. And so, yeah, healing can be really quick, and you can have these amazing sessions with plant medicine and breath work. And like you said, you need the integration, and the integration is slow and tiny.
Yeah. Yeah, I always say with psychedelics, and I'm sure most people would agree with me who have tried them. It's just like if you're not integrating, you're just doing drugs, pretty much. You know, you're just getting high, right?
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, that was crazy, dude. I was like on an eagle flying through space. It was so rad. Okay, cool. What are you gonna do with that?
Yeah.
What did you learn, and are you integrating it? And for me, yeah, I've definitely, I'm very, very grateful for my psychedelic experiences, and they're fewer, much, very pretty few and far between at this point in my life, just when I'm like intuitively called to it. But like it's mostly because like I did ayahuasca in 2018. I still feel like I'm integrating it. I'm in the integration. I don't know if I'll ever do it again. I don't feel called back to that at all. Like there's nothing in me that's like, "Ah, I need to go do that again." It's just like apply what I learned there. Mushrooms, that's a different story. I will definitely do mushrooms again, probably many times in my life because it's kind of like a nice little like dive in for me into like not only high level spiritual counsel, but also I do feel those mental health benefits, kind of like what you're talking about with CCB. Like if I do microdose mushrooms, I feel kind of like, oh, that feels like it was good for my brain the next day. But if I do a full journey with it, I'm like, wow, my brain feels like really good. Whoa, I feel very renewed, and that's cool to hear about breath work also. Like if you go deeper, the deeper you go into an altered state of consciousness, the more like brain benefits. Is that what I can't remember what you said? Was that BDNF or like
Yeah.
what is that? Okay.
Yeah, BDNF, yeah. So it's sort of just like rocket fuel for your brain. And
Yeah.
yeah, we can also talk about mystical experiences that people have studied on
I
conscious
love
connected
yeah.
breathwork. Yeah. So there was a huge study by Ehrman. It's a MAPS bulletin. So MAPS, they're like the psychedelic thing. So it's not a randomized control trial. So again, I have to say it's not the highest quality of evidence, but it's a huge study of 13,000 people over like 13 years at a psychiatric inpatient center in San Francisco. And they did, yeah, conscious connected breath work with all these people. And they found that 80% of people had a mystical experience. Um, that doesn't mean everyone had one on their first session, but over time, the more people did it, the more likely they were to get a mystical experience. Then another study by Puente, 2014, did just a 1 day session, and they found that 10% of people had a complete mystical experience. So a mystical experience is like I felt universal oneness. I saw some colors in my head. I felt connected to the presence of my great grandmother or something like that.
Mhm.
A complete mystical experience is like I had complete ego dissolution. I was one with the universe completely. I was in front of God and we had a really deep 10-year conversation. Well, it felt like 10 years, even though it was only an hour. So, yeah, so many stories of like, I've had all this grief, but my sister passed away last year, but she came to me during the breathwork session and told me she loved me and that everything was okay and I needed to move forward in my life, and then they do. That's the thing. It's like the proof of the pudding is in the eating, or like you judge a tree by its fruits. Like the fruits of CCB are so like ripe and potent. Like they actually do things. They actually change people's lives. They change people's personalities. Whereas I don't feel like other things like talk therapy can say the same. With such like consistency. I see so many people like I had this viral post that criticized talk therapy, and people were commenting like, "What are you talking about? Therapy's amazing. I've been in therapy for 5 years and it's great." And I'm just like, exactly, it's five
Right.
years, and you're still getting triggered by my posts. Like that's a long time.
Wow. I'll just leave that right there. Okay, tell us about Runga. Tell us how people can, participate in more from you.
Yeah, so Runga is me and Joseph and you and Amelia, my wife Natalia, who is actually a psychotherapist. So, a lot of people like ask me, what's it like living with a psychotherapist when you're criticizing psychotherapy? And she's like, she agrees. She doesn't think it's enough. That's why she also teaches breath work. Like I say like talk therapy is like bread. It's good for holding things together. If you give someone a piece of bread on their own, they're not going to be that satisfied. But if you add in some
Mm.
butter, some cheese, some ham, you've got a sandwich. Sorry. And yeah, the bread is useful for holding those things together, but on its own, it's probably not enough for a lot of people.
Mm.
So Runga, yeah, we are kind of a biohacking organization. We do retreats. We have a podcast called Runga Radio, and at the moment, we're about to launch our 90-day intensive that sort of integrates the findings from my trial. So it's like 3 online sessions of conscious connected breath work. We cover the basics. This is one of the big things I say is like, if someone's anxiety is caused by their 2 liter bottle of Coca-Cola they drink every day, no amount of talking about their attachment disorder is ever going to heal that. We need to educate people on the basics, and no psychotherapist gets trained in nutrition or exercise or sunlight or things like that, or methylation or mold or all this stuff.
Right.
All these things that can cause mental illness. So yeah, we have this 90-day program. Each week is a kind of a different topic. There's a lot of breath work in there as well. There's functional breathing, so the stuff I mentioned about the potato and the oxygen advantage stuff. There's exercise
Mm.
regimes. There's diet plans. There's nutrition education. There's meditation. There's other types of breath work like the Wim Hof style one called Soma. That's also a part of it. And yeah, there's an online community as well to support people in those things. And yeah, it's available to sign up for the wait list. It's you go to runga.co/intensive, and we should be launching that any day now. And yeah, if you sign up for the wait list, you get the first 2 weeks free.
Mm. Okay, amazing. Yeah, that makes me very happy to hear. Because yeah, I sometimes with therapy, I'm like, this is so if somebody has gut issues or like deep, deep health issues in some way, like they're gonna not be good. And there's just no matter how much you talk about it, I'm like, I wish these were a little more integrated, these two worlds, you know? Oh, surprise, you just had SIBO.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I also say there aren't risks. Going to therapy is not without risk. Just like iatrogenic illness is the third biggest killer in America. So that's medical malpractice. Someone leaving a sponge in you while they're doing surgery on you, misdiagnosis, giving you the wrong prescription. Similarly, a study that came out this year, Petitis 2025, found that people who go into therapy misremember their past, and the longer they're in therapy, the more likely they are to see their past as negative, even when it isn't necessarily negative. And you also see things like family estrangement. It used to be like 1 in 20 people were estranged from a family member. Now it's something like one in 10. I'm about to do a post on this, and I think that therapy is a part of that. People go into therapy, they think that things happened to them in their childhood that didn't go their way, were abusive. The therapist says you need to set a boundary, you need to cut off your parent, you need to cut off your child. And like, if you don't have mental illness, therapy may not be for you. Therapy is designed for mentally ill people. If you're not really struggling with something, you may go into therapy and make things worse, because that's what human memory does. It is famously unreliable, and this Petitis study is showing exactly that.
Mm, yeah, that's very powerful. Just a quick side response to that. I was just saying this to I was talking to my son. My kids are pretty mature the other day, and I was like, you know what's interesting is like now that I'm doing this therapy experiment or whatever, and I'm like going back to all my childhood stuff. I realized like my dad was a every other weekend dad. My parents got divorced when I was like a baby toddler, and he was every other weekend, and that was pretty typical in like the 80s and 90s, right? I was like, "Okay, let me look at that because if I look at that from my 2025 lens, I could put on this like, oh, my dad wasn't present in my life." And I'm like, "Yeah, he actually didn't really come to very much of my high school stuff or, every once in a while." So like I feel like if this was my first time, I was a newbie, I'd be like, "Oh, like I was emotionally neglected by my dad. He wasn't in my life." But because I'm a little more experienced with it, I'm like, what matters is how I felt growing up. And because that was like I never felt like that. I never once felt like I just looked forward to my dad getting us every other weekend. I loved my dad. It was fun. And I never felt like in any sort of pity party about it. And it was just like, yeah, that's just how life is. And like, yay, it's dad weekend. Like, hey, dad, he took us on vacation sometime in the summer. It was like, yay. Like, I had no weird issues with that. I'm like, I could see how I could like make one. Right? I'd be like, "Oh," but I don't feel like that, and I still love my dad, and then, like, everything's all good. So I'm just saying, like, I just was talking about that the other day. I think it is really important for us to think about, like, how we're telling our story, and I know you speak up about this a lot. I actually sent a post of yours to a family member today, on that, is, like, how we are looking at the past and how we are looking at the world, and is everyone a threat? Like, that kinda can come in sometimes through some of these, therapeutic mentalities. I'm not saying they don't have benefit, but it's like you got to use your discretion there. So I like that you're willing to talk about that because it's like a little uncomfortable and brave, but it needs to be talked about,
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just look at the world and the type of people who are struggling the most, and they're probably the people who've had the most therapy. Like,
Wow.
you look at like therapy culture as well. I'm quite critical of therapy culture. Therapy culture is therapy outside the therapy room. It's making sure children are emotionally regulated. It's, encouraging people to think of themselves as victims and not resilient, and encouraging people to go to see a therapist instead of speaking to their friends or family members. And yeah, this is this Frank Ferrucci thing that basically says, yeah, therapy has been too successful in that it's bled into areas that it shouldn't be, because therapy is supposed to be for mentally ill people. It's not supposed to be for organizations or schools or for the average person. And I think some people are being made worse by subscribing to
Mm.
this therapy culture. And obviously not everyone, probably the majority of people it helps, but there are certain people who seem to be vulnerable to this type of idea, and it's not working for them.
Well, one hint of hope for you, my new therapist that I just got on BetterHelp, but he's Ivy League educated. He's been doing it 20 something years. I was like, man, I hit the jackpot. Yeah, let's go. Um, and he was like, after I'm like, I think this is why I'm stuck in this pattern because of like childhood and blah, 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 blah. And I get done with my huge spiel, and he's like, starts talking about like, we can try to figure out why you do everything we do, or we can just talk about, he brought this up, not me. He doesn't even really know what I do for a living. Neuroplasticity and like repatterning things. So like next time this thing comes up, if you just change your behavior and ask yourself, like, what is the highest use of this moment that I'm in? Connect to your highest self and your highest identity and integrate that in those moments. You don't have to worry about why all that happened. I was like, whoa, this is like completely different than what I thought it was going to be. This is dope. I
Yeah.
was like, that makes this kind of like what I do. Okay, let's do it. I like this. So, there's definitely some therapists out there that are doing things a little differently. So just a little, plug for those guys in case they're listening and they're like, I don't do it like
Yeah, I'm
that.
sure there are. Yeah, there's a lot of great therapists out there. I've had some
Yeah.
great therapists. And yeah, for some people, going back to their past and dealing with actual traumas is exactly what they need. But it's
Hmm.
probably not the case for everyone. That's kind of my point, is like
Hmm.
trauma is not the only thing that causes people to be dysfunctional in their lives. There's a lot of other things. There's a lot of way around it.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for doing the study. We'll link up runga.co/intensive.
That's right.
So you can get on the wait list and your social media and all that. And yeah, just thank you so much. It's so cool. I really appreciate the work you're doing and the messages that you're putting out.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Inside Out Health Podcast. I hope it's been helpful to you in your journey. If you think that it might be helpful to someone you know, please share it with them. Please share on social media. It really helps me grow the show and reach more people with these amazing messages. And if you could be so kind as to rate the show and possibly even leave me a review, that really helps. So much thanks in advance if you do that. And yeah, please subscribe if you want to hear more of this type of content. I have lots of amazing expert guests on the way. All right. Thank you.